Why do we call the Revolutionary War a fight for freedom when millions were still enslaved? In this video, we walk through the Revolutionary War year by year. You will see more than battles and dates. Enslaved and freed Africans and native nations shaped the fight for independence. Their roles were hidden, but their courage helped push the colonies to victory. What sparked the Revolutionary War in 1775?
The Revolutionary War, often called the First United States War, began inside 13 colonies under British control. These colonies were New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Britain ruled them tightly. Taxes were collected without giving the colonists a voice in Parliament. Trade was restricted to benefit Britain. After the French and Indian War, the king even blocked colonists from moving west into native lands. In April 1775, resistance turned into open war. At Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts, colonists clashed with British soldiers. Nobody knew it at the time, but this was the first step toward independence. In June of that same year, the Continental Congress created the Continental Army. George Washington, a respected Virginian, was chosen as commander. The army was not just made of farmers and tradesmen. It also included free black men, and in some cases, enslaved men who were promised freedom if they fought. Native nations watched carefully. Many believed Britain would protect their land better than the colonists would. Others tried to remain neutral, knowing that either side could turn against them once the war ended. By the close of 1775, protests had become a war for survival. The colonies were no longer debating Britain's authority. They were fighting for their future.
What changed in 1776 when independence was declared?
The war had spread beyond Massachusetts. British forces pushed into New York, and George Washington's army struggled against their strength. The colonists faced defeat after defeat, and the fight looked uncertain. But in the summer of 1776, the colonies made a bold move. On July 4, 1776, representatives signed the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia, written mainly by Thomas Jefferson. It declared that the 13 colonies were now free and independent states. The words spoke of liberty and equality, but not everyone was included in that vision. Millions of Africans remained enslaved, and native nations were not recognized as equal partners. Freedom was written on paper, but it was not shared by all. The war continued. Washington's army was beaten in New York and forced to retreat across New Jersey. Then morale sank and many soldiers deserted. But in December, Washington took a daring chance. On Christmas night, he crossed the icy Delaware River and attacked Hessian soldiers at Trenton. The victory was small, but it lifted spirits and kept the revolution alive. Others saw the British as the better chance for freedom and joined their side. Native nations also weighed their choices, knowing whichever path they took would shape their people's survival. By the end of 1776, the United States was declared on paper, but it was far from secure. The colonies had claimed independence, but they still had to prove they could win it.
Did the revolution turn at Saratoga and Valley Forge in 1777?
The British planned to cut New England off from the rest of the colonies. Their goal was to crush the rebellion by dividing it. They moved troops south from Canada, but the plan failed. At the Battle of Saratoga in New York, American forces forced a large British army to surrender. This was the first major victory for the Patriots, and it changed the course of the war. The win at Saratoga proved that the colonies could stand up to Britain. It also convinced France to join the fight. France brought money, supplies, soldiers, and a navy. Without that alliance, the revolution might have collapsed. Still, the struggle was far from over. That winter, Washington's army camped at Valley Forge in Pennsylvania. The cold was brutal, food was scarce, and disease spread. Soldiers wrapped their feet in rags because they had no shoes. Many did not make it, and many more deserted. But those who stayed grew stronger. Under the training of Baron von Steuben, a Prussian officer, the ragtag army began to look like a real fighting force. Enslaved and free Africans continued to serve in the ranks. Some fought in integrated units, shoulder to shoulder with white soldiers. Others remained with the British, working as laborers, scouts, or soldiers in exchange for promised freedom. Native nations faced rising pressure as both sides demanded alliances. Some tribes split, tearing old bonds apart.
Why did Britain shift the war to the south in 1779?
The Revolutionary War was no longer just between the colonies and Britain. France had fully entered the fight, and Spain had also joined in against Britain. The war stretched across the seas, from the Caribbean to Europe. But inside the United States, the fighting grew harsher than ever. Britain changed its focus. Instead of trying to crush New England, they turned south. Leaders in London believed the southern colonies held stronger loyalist support. They also knew the South's economy, built on enslaved labor and plantation crops, was valuable. If they could control the South, they believed they could break the rebellion. In 1780, the British captured Charleston, South Carolina. In one of their greatest victories of the war, thousands of American soldiers were taken prisoner, and the South looked lost. But resistance did not end there. Patriots in the backcountry launched surprise attacks. Fighters like Francis Marion, remembered as the Swamp Fox, struck British forces using guerrilla tactics, hitting fast and disappearing into the swamps. The South became the harshest part of the war. Battles were fought not only against British soldiers, but also between neighbors, with loyalists fighting patriots. Native nations along the southern frontier were also drawn in. Many sided with Britain, hoping that a British victory would slow the tide of settlers who threatened their land. Yet in every case, their villages and land suffered as the fighting tore through the region.
How did Yorktown become the final blow?
Both sides were exhausted by 1781. Britain held key southern cities like Charleston and Savannah, but they struggled to control the countryside. The Continental Army, though worn down, refused to quit. American troops scored a victory at the Battle of Cowpens in South Carolina. It showed that Patriot forces could still beat seasoned British troops. From there, fighting moved into Virginia, where the final act of the war would unfold. A turning point came when the French Navy sailed into the Chesapeake Bay. For the first time, Britain's powerful navy was blocked. On land, George Washington and French General Rochambeau marched their combined armies south. Together, they trapped British General Cornwallis at Yorktown, Virginia. The siege lasted weeks. Day and night, cannons pounded British defenses. Black men, both freed and enslaved, labored in the trenches alongside Patriot soldiers. They also fought in the ranks of the Continental Army. while native scouts tracked movements in the surrounding countryside. Cornwallis could not hold out any longer. He surrendered his entire army. The victory at Yorktown did not erase every battle, but it broke Britain's will to continue. Across the Atlantic, the Parliament grew tired of the cost, and peace talks began. Still, Yorktown marked the end of British control. The Revolutionary War was all but over, and the idea of a new nation, the United States of America, was secured.
What did the Treaty of Paris in 1783 mean for the new United States?
After Yorktown, the fighting slowed. Skirmishes continued in some places, but the major battles were done. Britain's government had grown tired of spending money and losing soldiers in a war that dragged on for years. Negotiations for peace began. The Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783. Britain officially recognized the independence of the United States. The new nation's borders stretched to the Mississippi River in the west, Canada in the north, and Spanish Florida in the south. On paper, the United States had won freedom.
But freedom did not reach everyone. The black men who fought for the Patriots often returned to the same chains they had tried to escape. Black men who sided with Britain were taken to Nova Scotia, the Caribbean, or even Sierra Leone, while others were abandoned and re-enslaved. Native nations were not included in the treaty at all, even though they fought and sacrificed. Instead, the United States immediately began pushing west, seizing more native land. For white colonists, the Revolution was a victory. They created a republic with the promise of self-government. For black men and native nations, it was a beginning filled with broken promises, but also with seeds of resistance that would continue to grow. Those seeds of resistance would blossom into the first organized abolitionist movements, with freed black leaders, and those once enslaved helping build a nation that refused to see them as freed. Next time, we will uncover how the fight for Texas set off the Mexican War. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss it. That's a wrap, history seekers. Getting to the roots is where history comes alive. We uncover the truth about Africa, African Americans, and American history, one story at a time. Thanks for watching. Peace and love.